Hello?
Hello, Stephanie.
Yes.
This is Richard Crouse in Toronto.
Hi, Richard.
How are you doing?
I'm good, thanks. How are you?
Oh, very well, thank you. Thanks for taking a few minutes to chat with me today.
Oh, sure.
Now, I wanted to ask you about something that I read online regarding your inspiration for the host.
Yeah.
And it said, the quote is, "The kernel of thought that became the host was inspired by absolute boredom."
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little bit about what that means?
Yeah. When I actually came up with the idea, I was driving from Phoenix to Salt Lake City, which is just through the desert. There's really nothing for hours and hours. And when I was a kid, we used to travel a lot by car as a family. That's the only way we would ever go anywhere because there were a lot of us. And we didn't have TVs in the car or any mode of entertainment aside from annoying your brother or sister. And so I would tell myself stories to, stay sane. And so I kind of fell into that on this trip because I didn't have anyone to talk to, and so I was just sort of entertaining myself. And I kind of was in the middle of that. The idea of two people in one body in love with the same person, and that conflict. And then I sort of, thought, oh, hey, that's actually not a bad idea, and started working on it, and just in my head until I could get to where I could start typing.
And was it conceived as some kind of science fiction story initially, or does that come later? Does the sort of overreaching idea that it's going to be about two people in one body, and then you come up with the details? Was that the kernel of it?
Kind of. I mean, I knew from the very beginning that it wasn't like a multiple personalities kind of thing.
Right.
It was always an alien presence. So it was a science fiction from that moment, but like the whole world wasn't all fleshed out, like where they were at and how this was happening. And so that kind of was sort of the next step after I thought of, this would be a cool problem to solve.
Right.
And the next step was, what's the world where this problem can exist? And so that was all part of that same drive, actually just kind of coming up with different elements of the world.
You should take this drive more often, maybe.
Maybe. I don't know. It's pretty bad.
Well, your dad was a science fiction fan.
Yes.
From what I understand.
That's what he read to us when we were kids, so that's where I first started loving reading.
And it was the stories, these kind of speculative fiction fantasy stories?
Yeah. I remember he read us Dune. The first one actually gave me nightmares. And he read us some Orson Scott Card, which I love.
Right.
And then he read us like David Eddings fantasy and all of and sort of Shannara, that kind of world, which was great for growing imagination.
Mm-hmm.
And also and I really had an affinity for that kind of reading. So I don't think it's an accident that the second world that I created was a science fiction world.
Right. And how old were you when you were being read these stories? Were you very young, or was it sort of...
pretty much my whole childhood.
Really?
I don't remember when he started reading because I was small. And then, he kept on reading because my brothers were young until I was in high school.
Wow, that's lovely. It's a lovely image.
It's nice to have a dad like that, for sure.
Yeah. Now, you've also referred to the host, and we'll get to the film in a second. I'm sort of starting to lay the groundwork here a little bit, I guess. But you referred to the host as science fiction for people who don't like science fiction. And is that, a function of the romance that goes along with it and that sort of thing? Or what exactly do you mean by that?
No, my experience with people who, when you say, oh, have you seen Firefly? And they're like, oh, no, I don't do science fiction.
Right.
They're kind of immediately turned off by this idea, I think, that it's like this very technological spaceships and laser guns and there's no human element to it. When really science fiction is all about like really exploring the human element, I feel like, when it's done right.
Mm-hmm.
And this book, it doesn't challenge you if you don't want to have to completely construct in your mind a new world, because it's in our world and it looks the same and it's in people who are in our bodies, and so it feels the same, and you don't have to try and immerse yourself in something that's completely alien to you. Everything should feel very familiar, and I think that takes away one of the hurdles for people who aren't sure about science fiction. I also think that most people, if they gave science fiction a try, would probably love it.
Right. Well, I always think that the best science fiction, like I think the best sports movies and, anything, it's not really ever about the science fiction. That's sort of that's the setting. The stories that work really, really well are, generally speaking, very human stories that comment on the human condition that happen to be set in a different world.
Right, and that's what I love about science fiction, because it lets you go to a place where something that isn't possible in our world could happen, but then the people in the world are still like us, and so we understand everything that they do. We think, yes, I would do that in that situation. It feels very real. It kind of lets us experience something that we haven't yet, but that, I don't know, we might.
Right. Now, this book would have, I guess, been written right in the middle of everything else that's happened in the last few years, the Twilight juggernaut that really has taken off in such a big way. Did you write this book with an eye towards it being made into a film, or are those two completely separate things in your head?
They are completely separate. Also, when I started working on this, I was actually editing the clips, and I don't believe that the first Twilight movie had even come out.
Really?
So it was a while ago. It was still in a world that had not been as affected by movies as my world had not been as affected by movies as it is now. So it really wasn't any part of my thought process. And then the other thing was, is later, when it was published, and the movies for Twilight were doing so well, I always felt like it was unfilmable. I mean, the whole thing happens inside one person's head for the most part. And, I didn't think it could be done. And then I was proven wrong.
Well, and then they cast Saoirse Ronan.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I've always thought that she's remarkable. From the first time, I must have been Atonement was the first film that I saw her in. And then movies like Death Defying Acts and Little Bones and all sorts of things, that she is such a terrific actress. But she's younger than the Melanie in the book.
Yeah.
And were you concerned by that?
I was, particularly since, Twilight kind of carries a lot of baggage with it.
Right.
And I didn't want to do another story with teenagers. It just felt like it was too close. Then the book feels so much different. The book doesn't feel the same at all to me. It's such a different atmosphere. But I wanted it to look different. I actually wanted to age them up and go with an actress who was around 25 to 30.
Right.
And then, the other producer loves Saoirse, and I said, I know she's a fantastic actress, but, I want someone older. And he said, well, go and see Hannah. And I didn't want to, but I did. And, I mean, she just blew me away. And I started to realize, as I was watching that, you know what, she can do this. And there probably aren't very many people in the world who can. And so, I mean, in the end, we were really lucky to have her, and I'm glad that I got my little prejudices out of the way early.
She's one of those people that, to me, because I don't know how old she's 16, 17 years old or something now, I think.
She's 18 now.
Is she 18? And she strikes me as someone who is like a 40-year-old in a 18-year-old's body, just for the amount of what she brings to it. Pardon me?
I said, if not 100 years.
Right, yeah.
Body. I mean, she really is. I've never worked with anyone like her. I would work with her on anything. I cannot say strongly enough how just blown away I am by her talent. She's like nobody else.
Right. Now, we're almost out of time. I just have one last question. This is just a little bit unrelated to what we're talking about, and it's just something that caught my eye in the news recently. There's an English author named Terry Deary who's written a series of books called Horrible History Books, and they're extremely popular, and he's just come out and said that he hates that his books are in libraries because he feels that he's losing money by having these books in libraries, and that the era of libraries is over. And I wanted to ask you, because Twilight has, in the series, has been so closely identified with helping to introduce reading, you along with the Harry Potter books, to a whole new generation who might not necessarily have picked up books otherwise. How you feel about the whole library thing, and if you agree with him.
Oh, so not. The opposite. I mean, when I was growing up, there were a lot of us kids, and my parents were really frugal, and I was reading is who I was, and I spent every minute that I could at the library. I mean, the library was my favorite place, and the librarians were so, they take care of you. And all those books were like my friends, and I'd go back and visit them and reread them over and over again. And I can't imagine a world without libraries. And I am so glad that my books are in libraries for kids, so they don't have to buy them, so they can go out and read them and have that experience if they want to. I think that's very, very special.